If you want to instantly improve the sound of your worship band, you should start using clicks and tracks. But in 2022, there's so many resources and so much marketing from different companies. It's confusing to know where to even start. What app should I use? Where should I buy content from? Well, in this video, I want to talk about how to get started using clicks and tracks in 2022. Now to start with, let's talk about why you should consider using tracks even in the first place. Now, I think the first reason, it allows you to reproduce the sounds you hear from the record. Now, you can even buy the original master recordings from your favorite artists and use the exact sounds that they used in the studio. This is going to allow you to reproduce those sounds just like you hear them on the record live with your band. No matter the level of musicianship from your volunteers, no matter how great your players are or how well they are at reproducing the original parts, you can have the original parts live on stage. Two, it allows you to fill in for missing musicians. You get that late night text from your bass player on Saturday that they can't be there. No need to stress, no need to worry. You can unmute the bass part and the rest of the band can play along. Now, we don't want to use tracks to take people's positions. We want real humans on stage playing. But again, in those scenarios that happen so often where people call out, they can't be there, or let's say there happens to be a global pandemic that prevents people from meeting in person, you have tracks to fill in for those musicians. And then number three, and this by far is not an exhaustive list, but number three, it allows you to automate your production. You can sync your lights, lyrics, and video to your tracks. All you have to have is a click track. You have to have a format of your song figured out, and you can sync lyrics, lights, and video to your tracks. And there's a few reasons why you should consider doing it, but let's talk about how we make it happen now. Number one, the most important thing that you have to do to use clicks and tracks is you have to transition to in-ears. Now, we have talked a lot on this channel before about why you should use in-ears, how to make the transition, choosing an in-ear system for your band, choosing actual in-ears, some tips for choosing in-ears. I'm not going to talk about those today, but I'm going to link to those in the description. In fact, I've got a lot of resources I'll be mentioning and linking to content. But it's important, if you're going to use tracks and clicks, you have to first transition to in-ears. In fact, I've got some content showing you how to create a great in-ear mix in less than 5 minutes and really equip your team and make sure they feel comfortable with that. And we want to make sure they're comfortable using in-ears before we transition and do anything else. So the next thing we have to do is transition to click. In order to use tracks, we have to use in-ears and we have to be comfortable playing with a click. That means the band's comfortable playing at 90 BPM, the drummer's comfortable playing in time. People are used to that. They have figured that out. We don't want to make the transition to tracks, click, and in-ears at the same time. So make sure you've transitioned to in-ears, transition to using click, and then we transition to using tracks. Now, the past few weeks, I've talked about why you should use a click, how to transition your band to using a click. Again, I'll link those in the description of this. But if you want an easy way to give your team some access to clicks, then head to FromStudioToStage.com/clicks, and they can download over 20 gigs worth of free click track files in any tempo and in multiple time signatures that they can use to practice with. And for some of you, that may be enough, just to have in-ears and have click. But now we can talk about tracks. If we want to use tracks, let's talk about the things that we need to make this happen. Number one, we have to decide what will we use for tracks. And this is where it can get confusing, particularly in 2022. The way that technology has progressed with the development of apps like Prime and Playback, this conversation is not as easy as it used to be. Now, I've created a lot of content on this subject. I did over an hour-long shootout between Prime, Playback, and Ableton Live, and I go through the entire feature list of all of those apps and showing you what apps can do what features are missing from apps. And again, I've linked that in the description of this video. I also asked the question, is Ableton Live still relevant for worship leaders in 2022? If you listen to the marketing from Loop community, from Multitracks, a lot of times they say, hey, you don't even need to use Ableton Live. There's no reason to. You should use Playback and Prime. Well, I still think there are reasons to use Ableton Live, and I discussed that in, again, one of the videos I've mentioned. To make this a really easy, simple decision for you, I've put together a free quiz. You can head to multitracks.app. That's multitracks.app. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions. This is going to take less than a minute, and I'm going to tell you exactly what app you should use to run tracks for your worship band. So if you want to save time, head to multitracks.app to check that out. Now, I've got a couple points here I want to run through really quickly to give you some pointers to maybe help you decide on what app and device to use for you. One, if you're just getting started with using tracks, consider Playback or Prime. There's no need to dive right into Ableton. There's no need to use a full-fledged, full-featured DAW. Start with Playback or Prime. They're custom built for running tracks, particularly custom built for running tracks in a worship environment. Number two, if you're using a lot of custom content, please use Ableton. Where Playback and Prime both fall short is the need to upload content, to add time signatures, tempo changes, markers to that content. Use Ableton if you're using a lot of custom content, or particularly if all of your content is custom content. Number three, if you want to edit your content fully, have control over transitions, to edit parts, to change the name of guide cues, a lot of just deep editing. You're someone who customizes things a lot, Ableton is still the way to go. There's still a lot of things Playback and Prime can't do. I personally feel like they shouldn't do. They should stay with Ableton. So if you need that sort of control, that kind of deep control, then definitely consider Ableton. If you're only using PC, and that's what you're using on Windows PC, you've got to use Ableton. Playback and Prime, at least at the recording of this tutorial, are not available on Windows PC. So if you want to use PC, you can use Ableton, which is available both on Mac or PC. If you only have an iPhone or iPad, then you're going to be using Prime or Playback. Ableton is not available for iPhone or iPad. I want to say, at least at the recording of this video, it's unavailable. I personally don't think it's ever going to be available because it is a full DAW. Now, I would love to see it available on iPad or iPhone, but it's not currently. I don't think it ever will be. So if that's all you have as far as devices go, then you're going to be using iPad or you're going to be using a iPhone. Now, again, as a reminder, if you want some tips to figure out quickly how to what app you should use, what device you should use, go to multitracks.app to take that free quiz. And if you're using Ableton Live or considering using Ableton Live, then head to FromStudioToStage.com/template. It will save you so much time. You can download my free template, which is available for Live 9 Intro and higher. So whether you're using Live 9, 10, or 11, Intro, Standard, or Suite, that template will work for you. Now, we've decided on a device. We've gone to multitracks.app to take the free quiz, and we know we're going to use Playback, Prime, or Ableton Live. What's the next step in this process? Well, we need to decide what type of content and where we get content from. There's incredible resources available. Multitracks.com, Loop Community, Praise Charts. There's free resources like Life Church's Open Network. We can even create our own content. But where do we get our content from? How should we decide who to choose content from? Well, like I've mentioned in every one of these sections so far, I have a ton of resources and a lot of resources, particularly in this area, to break down each website. I walk through Loop Community site, Multitrack site, Praise Chart site to explain the different file types that they have available. And I even show you how to format every single one of those files in Ableton Live so you can quickly and efficiently build a set. So check out that content, but let me give you a couple really quick pointers, really 3 points that are going to make this super easy for you to decide. Number one, if you're using Playback either on iPhone, iPad, or Mac, then buy content from Multitracks. Again, like I mentioned before, these apps, Playback and Prime, don't handle custom content really well. They can do it, you can upload it, but you're gonna spend way more time uploading content than if you just used Ableton. So if you're using Playback, then purchase content from multitracks.com. Number two, you probably know where I'm going with this. If you're using Prime, then purchase content from Loop Community. Loop Community's catalog is massive. They have a lot of original master recordings, and they're growing and getting more of those, but they have tons and tons of community tracks, premium tracks. They're an incredible resource. But if you're using Prime, then purchase your content from Loop Community. And then number three, if you're using Ableton, and this one may not be as clear initially, but if you're using Ableton Live, then purchase content from multitracks.com. I have a super long video, I think it's about 40 minutes, where I buy content from Loop Community, Multitracks, Praise Charts, compare it, and I explain why, if you're using Ableton Live as a worship leader, you should buy your content from multitracks.com. So check out that video, again, linked in the description of this video. Now, a quick point here, a quick note before we move on. When you're buying content, buy stems. Don't buy accompaniment tracks. Don't buy tracks that are kind of a simplified version of this. Multitracks has accompaniment tracks. They have custom mix. LC has enhancement tracks and some other smaller versions. Buy the full stems because it's going to give you the most freedom and flexibility when you're using content live. Remember at the beginning, we talked about your bass player calls out sick. Well, as long as we have stems, we can unmute that bass part and we have the bass part available to us right there. If we've got something that's pre-mixed, like an accompaniment track or a custom mix, then we're limited there. So now let's talk about a device. Now, if you are using Playback or Prime, I suggest that you buy an iPad or an iPhone. And here's the great thing. This is super easy. Any iPhone, iPad that you buy from Apple that's new at the time of recording this video is going to be plenty powerful. You don't have to get the most powerful iPad Pro. The more storage you buy, the better it's going to be in the end, because you're not going to run out of space as quickly. But any iPad you buy, any iPhone you buy is going to be plenty powerful enough. It's amazing where technology is that we don't really have to stress about that. And again, if you're going to buy an iPad or iPhone, you have to use Playback or Prime. You can't use Ableton on those devices. Now, let's talk PC or Mac. Should you buy a PC? Should you buy a Mac? Now, personally, I'm very biased in this conversation. I only use Mac computers. That's what I've used for a very long time. They work really well for me. And so I'm a little on the biased side, saying to use Mac. PCs have come a long way. And I know a lot of folks that use PCs live, they use them in their studio and have no problems. So I'm going to say buy a Mac. But if you buy a PC, here's my one point that I want to stress. Don't go to Target and just buy a PC off the shelf. Buy something that meets the minimum system requirements, for instance, on Ableton site. And I'll leave a note in the description and a link to that so that you can check it out. Now, when it comes to buying a Mac, here's what's really cool about this is all the new M1 Macs, from the MacBook Air all the way up to the Mac Pro, the Mac Studio, all of those are plenty powerful to run Ableton Live. You won't have issues running Ableton Live on any of those computers. Now, as a side note, there is an interesting kind of bug on Apple Silicon right now. You just need to lower your buffer size in Ableton and you'll be perfectly fine. That'll be fixed and optimized here soon. But if you're buying a Mac and looking to buy a Mac to run tracks on, any M1 Mac is going to work perfectly fine. Just find something that's in your price point that fits the kind of context you want to use: laptop, Mac Mini, Mac Studio, whatever it is, and that's going to work perfectly fine. Now, if you want some suggestions, my suggestions on, for instance, what kind of Mac should you buy, how much RAM should you get, how many cores do you need, then head to fromstudiostage.com/gear. I lay all that out in my free gear guide, and I'm going to walk you through all of that. Now, at this point, we've decided what we're going to use for tracks. We've decided where we're going to buy tracks from. We've got a device we can run tracks on. What do we do now? The next thing we have to do is connect our device to our soundboard. How do we do that? Well, the most affordable way to do that, no matter if you're using an iPhone, iPad, a PC, or a Mac, is to use a headphone cable like the Hosa CMP 153 or 159. I've got some tutorials, surprise, that I've linked in the description where I show you how to connect that headphone cable directly to your soundboard. You'll go from your cable to direct boxes, which then get back to your soundboard via XLR cables or a stage snake. And that's the easiest and simplest way to get audio out of your device. Now, the most important thing when you're doing that, and I mentioned this in those tutorials, is that you separate your click and guide from your tracks. And all of these apps make it very simple, whether you're using Playback, Prime, or Ableton, to separate your click and tracks from click and guide from your tracks. And that's super important because we want to make sure that only people on stage can hear click and guide, and that people in the congregation can hear just tracks and not click and guide. That's super important. Now, that's the best way to get started, but it's not the best way to run audio. It's not the best way to get audio from your device to your soundboard. The best way to do that is to use an audio interface with at least 4 outputs. You could even consider a network audio solution like Dante. What that's going to allow you to do is have multiple outputs from your computer. One, at the very most basic level, it's going to allow you to have click and guide separate, and then have stereo tracks, right? Which is 4 outputs: click, guide, and then tracks left, tracks right. So at the most bare minimum setup, we have 4 outputs on an interface. But this starts to get really exciting when we have 8 outputs or more. Remember, we talked before, one of the great uses of tracks is to fill in for missing musicians. So when your bass player calls out sick Saturday night, you can unmute the bass part. But best of all, on Sunday morning, you can run a cable from your interface and send your bass down that specific output of your interface, plug directly into the bass player's DI. And then back at the soundboard, the audio engineer is going to see tracks on the tracks outputs, and then see bass actually show up on the bass input on the console. And that's going to be huge. That's going to allow the sound engineer to mix tracks and treat them like they're an instrument, treat them like they're a part of the band, which to me is incredibly, incredibly important. Now, when it comes to buying an interface for live performance, like I mentioned, it's important to buy something that has at least 4 outputs, because we want stereo outputs and click and guide. And there's a lot of options available out there. So I've got a bunch of videos where I share my top suggestions, my top picks for audio interfaces for live performance. Plus, I have that gear guide that I mentioned earlier that you can get for free by going to fromstudiotostage.com/gear. So make sure you check that out. Now, it's super important when we're leading worship, in particular leading worship with tracks, that it doesn't look like we're staring at a computer. It doesn't look like we're commandeering the space shuttle on stage with computers in front of us and all this gear in front of us. We need to stay focused on leading worship. As a friend of mine used to always say, you don't want to look like you're checking your email on stage. And the way you do that is by using a MIDI controller. And so what I would suggest that you do is that you purchase a MIDI controller that you can use with Playback Prime or Ableton Live, so that you can move your computer, you can move your iPhone or iPad out of the way, and you can trigger and run tracks with your feet with a MIDI foot controller. You can use a MIDI keyboard controller to trigger tracks, and no one will have any idea that you're actually running tracks. We can move our computer, our iPad, or iPhone out of the way, and we're going to be able to focus on simply leading worship. We're not going to be staring at a screen. We're not going to be focused on pressing spacebar. We're just going to be focused on leading worship. Now, when it comes to buying a MIDI controller, it's important to buy something that fits your context. If you're a guitar player, consider a MIDI foot controller. If you're a drummer, consider a drum pad that you can trigger tracks with. And I have, surprise, surprise, tons of videos walking through suggestions based on your particular context, as well as price points. So you can check those out in the link and using the link in the description, as well as check out that free gear guide that you can find at fromstudiostage.com/gear. Now, finally, I want to wrap up with some tips for success. If you implement these tips, this is going to be a smooth process for you and your team. Number one, learn to be spontaneous and have freedom and flexibility. Using tracks does not mean you are restricted. And here's a potentially controversial opinion. Having freedom and flexibility with tracks does not mean playing the whole song as is and waiting till the end to jump around and repeat things and do stuff. You can, in the middle of a song, repeat a song section, skip a song section, navigate through your song very, very easily in Playback Prime or Ableton Live. You don't have to use Playback and Prime to do that. Ableton Live gives you that freedom and flexibility as well. Don't be restricted in tracks. Learn how to be spontaneous with tracks, and I have tons of content showing you how to do that, and learn how to have freedom and flexibility. Number two, remember, this is an instrument. Using tracks is not just something you do on your computer and you don't think about. Prepare and practice. One of my pet peeves is seeing people pop up on Instagram on worship fails videos and going, yeah, that's why I don't use tracks. Yeah, the click came out of the house. This thing happened, that thing happened. It's not that just things are prone to happen when you use tracks. It's that you didn't prepare. You would never show up, pull your guitar out of your case, and immediately start leading worship without tuning. Prepare. Treat this as an instrument. Learn your instrument well. Practice and prepare before you step on stage to use tracks. Number three, learn to improve your workflow. One of my pet peeves that I hear right now is I hear people say, oh, I use Playback and Prime because Ableton takes way too long. In fact, often you'll hear Loop Community and Multitracks, no offense to them, they're trying to sell a product, say, hey, if you want to save some time and stop wasting time using Ableton, then use Playback and Prime. But it's simply not true. If you follow a proven process, you can create a template, you can format your songs, and you can build a live set. And I can teach you how to build a live set in Ableton Live in less than 5 minutes every single week. That's all it takes. It does not take hours. And you'll have more freedom and flexibility. You'll have more customization than you'll ever have in Playback and Prime. But in order to do that, you have to follow a proven process. I call that the 3-part framework for using tracks. And you can get access to that content and learn how to have freedom and flexibility with using tracks if you head to fromstudiostage.com/subscribe. And when you go there, you'll learn more about From Studio to Stage, which is a community that helps you learn to run tracks like a pro in Ableton Live. You don't have to be stuck. You can have spontaneity. You don't have to take hours building a set to get customization to automate your production. You'll learn how to build a set weekly in 5 minutes or less. You'll learn how to do this in a way that is stable, and it's a proven process that's used by artists and worship leaders across the globe. And when you sign up to become a From Studio to Stage student, you get access to over 50 courses. I add a brand new course every single month, and you get access to those courses on demand 24/7, which means whenever you're available and you want to learn, those courses are there ready for you. In addition to that, you get access to every template, every patch, every preset I've ever created and will create. And I release something brand new every single month, and you get it for free because you get 200 credits each month that you can use in the store. It's equivalent to and similar to getting $200 every single month when you subscribe. In addition to that, you get access to a private community of like-minded students and worship leaders and musicians from across the globe. So if you have a question, you can ask them, you can interface with them. And then finally, you get access to a monthly call every single month where you can sit down and ask me your questions. You can say, Will, how do I do this? I want some more spontaneity. I want some more flexibility with tracks, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. So no matter what question you have, I will answer that in the monthly call. Again, to get access to that, head to FromStudioToStage.com/subscribe. You'll learn more about the community and you'll see exactly how you can subscribe and get access. Now, if you're not ready for that quite yet, then I want to encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I release a brand new tutorial every single day at 10 a.m. Central. Wednesdays are devoted to content for worship leaders, so you'll find more content like this, but you'll see something brand new every single day at 10 a.m. Central. To get access to that, though, you've got to hit subscribe, and I want to encourage you to hit the bell icon so you're notified when I post brand new content, so you're always in the loop at what's coming up soon. Now, if you want to learn how to use tracks in a way that can give you freedom and flexibility, and you want to learn more about using tracks on stage, then make sure you stay tuned next week as we continue this conversation. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.